The moment I realized my own family was about to destroy me wasn't when they yelled, or when they insulted me, or even when they laughed. It was when my mother handed me a folded black and white uniform and said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Put this on. Tonight isn't about you." That sentence hit harder than anything I had heard before, because it wasn't said in anger. It was said casually, like what they were doing was normal, justified, even deserved. And in that moment, standing in my childhood bedroom on the night of my sister's celebration, I understood something terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. It was my sister's graduation party, and not just any graduation. Law school. Top of her class. A venue rented downtown, crystal glasses, catered food, about 30 guests, professors, family friends, future colleagues, people who looked important because they wanted to feel important. My parents had spent weeks bragging about it, posting photos online, reminding everyone how proud they were. What they didn't post was the role they had already chosen for me. Not guest. Not family. Not even background. I was there to serve. When I asked why, my father didn't even look up from his phone. He said it like it was obvious. Someone needs to help the staff. And it's not like you have anything better going on. That was the moment the room felt smaller. I had things going on. A career. A life. A future I had built quietly, carefully, without their help. But none of that mattered to them because acknowledging my success would have meant admitting they were wrong about me for years. And my family hated being wrong more than they hated hurting me. I should have walked out then. That's what people always say when they hear this story later. I would have left. I would have refused. I would have stood up for myself. But when the people who raised you train you your entire life to believe your value is conditional, walking away doesn't feel brave. It feels impossible. So I put on the uniform. I tied the apron. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself, not because of the clothes, but because of how small I had allowed myself to feel. When we arrived at the venue, everything was already perfect. White tablecloths, soft music, glasses clinking, laughter echoing across polished floors. No one looked at me twice. That was the point. I blended into the background exactly the way my family wanted. My sister walked in wearing a designer dress, glowing with attention, soaking it in like oxygen. She didn't even acknowledge me. Not once. Not a glance. Not a thank you. Nothing. Then the comments started. Quiet at first. "Excuse me, can you take this? More wine over here." And then louder. More confident. One of my sister's friends laughed and said, "Wow, they really went all out with the staff tonight." Another guest leaned toward my mother and said, not quietly enough, "She does a great job. Very professional." My mother smiled like it was a compliment. Like this was exactly how it was supposed to be. What hurt most wasn't the strangers. It was my family watching. Watching me carry trays. Watching me clean spills. Watching me disappear in plain sight. My sister's boyfriend's father, a man who had never spoken to me before, waved his hand dismissively and said, "Keep the help away from the stage area." The help. I felt something crack inside me then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet fracture that changed everything. Because standing there, holding a tray while my family laughed with people who didn't even know my name, I made a decision. I wasn't going to correct them. I wasn't going to defend myself. I wasn't going to explain. I was going to let this play out. All of it. Because they thought humiliation was the end of the story. They didn't realize it was the beginning. And the worst part. The night hadn't even reached its peak yet. I learned something important that night while refilling glasses and pretending not to hear my own name being replaced with, "Hey," and "Excuse me." People become reckless when they believe you are invisible. They speak freely. They reveal things. They assume silence means ignorance. And my family, convinced they had finally put me back in my place, stopped guarding themselves at all. That was their first real mistake. As the party moved forward, the alcohol loosened tongues and sharpened arrogance. My father stood near the bar, laughing loudly, telling a group of men how proud he was of my sister and how not everyone in the family had the discipline for success. He didn't say my name, but everyone knew who he meant. My mother nodded along, adding small details like punctuation marks, emphasizing how hard it was to carry people who refused to rise. I stood less than 10 feet away, pouring wine, absorbing every word, my face calm, my hands steady. Inside, something colder than anger was forming. Something focused. My sister finally noticed me when she needed something. She snapped her fingers, actually snapped them, and said, "Can you clean this up?" as if I were furniture that had malfunctioned. I looked down at the floor, at the small spill near her shoes, and I cleaned it. Slowly. Carefully. Not because I was submitting, but because I was listening. Her friends were talking about clerkships, judges, internships. Names were being dropped. Connections were being bragged about. And among those names, I heard one I recognized immediately. One that didn't belong in a casual conversation. One that should never have been said out loud in a room full of witnesses. That was when I realized how little they understood the danger of their own mouths. My family had spent years believing they were untouchable. They had money. Status. The right friends. They thought that protected them from consequences. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that silence had given me access. And access had given me clarity. I wasn't just hearing insults anymore. I was hearing evidence. At one point, my sister's boyfriend's father leaned toward my mother and said something about keeping everything clean before the next review. My mother laughed and said, "Oh, don't worry. We've been cleaning up messes for years." The irony almost made me smile. Almost. Because I knew what messes really meant in that family. I had watched them manipulate paperwork, twist narratives, erase responsibility, and blame anyone who couldn't fight back. Including me. I carried trays past people who thought I was beneath them, and every step grounded me more. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't breaking. I was observing. I noticed who avoided certain conversations when certain names were mentioned. I noticed who suddenly changed the subject when finances came up. I noticed how confident my parents looked when they believed no one important was listening. They had no idea the most dangerous person in the room was the one they had dressed as a servant. There was a moment, brief but sharp, when my mother caught my eye across the room. Just for a second. Her smile faltered. Not because she felt guilt, but because she saw something unfamiliar in my expression. Calm. Control. Distance. I don't think she recognized it as resolve. I think she mistook it for defeat. That misunderstanding would cost her more than she could imagine. By the time dessert was served, the party had reached that comfortable stage where people assumed nothing unexpected could happen anymore. The speeches were coming. The applause. The celebration. Everyone was settled into their roles. My sister was the star. My parents were the architects of her success. And I was the help. Exactly where they thought I belonged. But while they were busy celebrating the story they had written about themselves, I was quietly preparing to rewrite mine. Not with a confrontation. Not with a scene. But with timing. Because humiliation screams. Power waits. And when my sister finally stepped up to the microphone, smiling, confident, ready to thank everyone who believed in her, I knew the night was about to turn in ways none of them were prepared for. My sister cleared her throat at the microphone, tapping it twice like she owned not just the room, but the future. The chatter softened into polite silence, glasses paused midair, and every eye turned toward her with admiration. She stood there glowing, wrapped in praise she hadn't fully earned, supported by sacrifices she would never acknowledge. My parents stood close, hands clasped, faces proud in that curated way they practiced for public moments. I stood near the wall, still in uniform, holding an empty tray, watching the lie reach its peak. She started with the usual script. Gratitude. Perseverance. How hard the journey had been. How family was everything. Each word felt rehearsed, polished to hide the truth underneath. She talked about late nights, about stress, about how she never could have done it alone. The crowd nodded, murmured approval. My mother dabbed her eyes dramatically. My father smiled like a man admiring his own reflection. And I listened, because buried inside her speech were details she didn't realize mattered. Names. Timelines. Claims that contradicted records I had memorized years ago. She was building her own scaffold, plank by plank, right in front of everyone. Then came the moment that shifted the air. She laughed lightly and said, "Of course, none of this would be possible without my parents, who always knew how to deal with problems, quietly." The word quietly lingered. A few people chuckled. Others exchanged looks. I felt it then, that subtle tightening in the room. The kind you only notice when you're trained to notice it. The kind that means something has just gone slightly wrong. My father stepped forward to join her, placing a hand on her shoulder, adding his own commentary. He talked about discipline. About cutting distractions. About how sometimes, to succeed, you have to make hard choices about who you carry with you and who you leave behind. His gaze swept the room and landed on me, lingering just long enough to send the message he wanted everyone to receive. This is what happens when you don't measure up. This is where you end up. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter followed. Not everyone laughed. Some people looked away. Some looked at me. Really looked at me. At the uniform. At the way I stood. At the way I wasn't shrinking. And that was when the dynamic began to fracture. Because humiliation only works when the audience agrees with it. And the audience was starting to notice the imbalance. My sister continued, emboldened by the lack of immediate resistance. She thanked professors, mentors, future employers, and then, with a careless smile, she gestured vaguely in my direction and said, "And thanks to everyone who helped tonight. Even the staff." A few heads turned sharply. Someone near the front frowned. Another whispered something to the person beside them. The word staff hit differently when it landed on someone whose eyes didn't match the role. I felt the room recalibrate. People are perceptive when you give them a reason to be. And suddenly, the contrast was too sharp to ignore. Why was I dressed like that? Why was I here? Why did I look more composed than the people celebrating? Questions began forming silently, and silence, I knew, was the beginning of doubt. That's when one of my sister's classmates leaned toward her and whispered something. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her expression change, just a flicker. Confusion. Irritation. She glanced back at me again, this time not with superiority, but with something closer to unease. My mother noticed it too. She straightened. My father shifted his weight. The confidence they had walked in with began to leak out, slowly, invisibly, like air from a tire you don't realize is punctured until the car starts pulling to one side. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't correct anyone. That restraint was doing more damage than any outburst ever could. Because now they were the ones wondering. Now they were the ones unsure. Now the story they thought they controlled was starting to wobble. The applause at the end of the speech was loud, but it wasn't clean. It was fractured. Uneven. Polite rather than passionate. And as people clapped, more eyes drifted back to me, searching for context, for explanation, for truth. They didn't know it yet, but the night had already turned. The humiliation had done its job, not to me, but to them. All that was left was for the truth to step forward. And the truth doesn't rush. It waits until the room is ready to hear it. And it was almost ready. What people don't realize about moments like that is that humiliation has a shelf life. It expires the second curiosity replaces compliance. And curiosity was spreading through that room faster than champagne. Conversations restarted, but they sounded different now. Lower. Sharper. People weren't talking about my sister's future anymore. They were talking about me. I could hear fragments as I passed with the tray. Who is she? Why is she dressed like that? Is she actually staff? Someone said, no way. Look at how she carries herself. Another replied, that doesn't make sense. Confusion is dangerous for people who rely on control, and my parents had built their entire authority on the assumption that no one would question them. My mother approached me first. Not publicly. Never publicly. She leaned in close, her smile still glued to her face, her voice sharp and urgent beneath it. Stay in the kitchen for a bit, she whispered. You're making people uncomfortable. The irony almost took my breath away. I met her eyes and said nothing. I didn't nod. I didn't argue. I simply looked at her long enough for her to realize I wasn't obeying. Her smile twitched. She walked away too quickly. That's when one of the professors approached me. A woman in her late 50s, respected, observant, not impressed by theatrics. She looked at my uniform, then at my face, then said calmly, "Excuse me, are you part of the catering staff?" I smiled politely and answered truthfully without explaining anything. No, just one word. Clean. Final. Her eyebrows lifted. Then who are you? She asked. Before I could respond, my sister appeared, laughing too loudly, inserting herself into the moment like a shield. Oh, she's helping out, she said quickly. The professor didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on me. Helping how? She asked. My sister hesitated. My father stepped in. Family matter, he said, dismissive. That was a mistake. Authority figures don't like being dismissed, especially by people whose confidence suddenly feels performative. The professor nodded slowly. Interesting, she said. Because I recognize her. My sister froze. My mother stiffened. The professor turned back to me. You were in my ethics seminar, weren't you? The room seemed to tilt. My sister's smile cracked. My father's face drained of color. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Yes, I said. Still calm. Still steady. I was. Silence fell like a dropped glass. Fragile. Loud. Impossible to ignore. The professor looked between my uniform and my parents. Then I'm confused, she said plainly. Because you don't look like someone who belongs in an apron. A few people nearby stopped pretending not to listen. My sister tried to laugh it off. It's just a joke, she said. Family stuff. But jokes don't make people uncomfortable unless there's truth bleeding through them. Another voice joined in. A man from the admissions board. Wait, he said. Aren't you the one who submitted that amicus brief last year? My father stepped back as if the floor had shifted beneath him. My mother's eyes darted around the room, calculating exits. The illusion was collapsing, and they had no script for this version of events. I finally spoke more than a sentence. Not loudly. Not emotionally. I'm here because my family asked me to be, I said. They wanted help. I let the word hang. Help. Simple. Loaded. So I helped. No accusation. No defense. Just truth placed gently on the table, letting everyone decide what it meant. The professor nodded once. "I see," she said. And in those two words was judgment. Not legal. Social. Moral. Immediate. My sister looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time that night, she didn't see staff. She saw a problem she couldn't control. My parents realized it too. They had humiliated me publicly, assuming it would shrink me. Instead, it had exposed them. And the worst part for them wasn't what I said. It was what everyone else was starting to understand on their own. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way movies make humiliation dramatic. There was no shouting, no scene-stealing confrontation, no glass shattering against marble floors. What happened instead was far more dangerous for people like my parents. The room kept going, but it no longer moved with them at the center. Conversations fractured and reformed without their permission. People leaned closer to one another. Heads tilted. Eyes flicked back toward me, then toward them, then back again. Reputation doesn't collapse with a bang. It erodes with whispers, and whispers were everywhere now. I kept doing exactly what I had been doing all night. I walked. I served. I smiled politely. But something fundamental had shifted. People thanked me now. Not absent-mindedly, not the way you thank furniture or background noise, but directly, deliberately. One woman took her glass from the tray and said, "Thank you, and I'm sorry," like she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for but knew it mattered. A man in a tailored suit asked my name, and when I told him, his expression changed just enough to be noticed. Recognition doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with discomfort. My parents retreated to a corner near the bar, close enough to watch me but far enough to avoid questions. My mother kept smoothing her dress like she could iron out the night if she tried hard enough. My father stared into his drink without drinking it. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but structurally, like a building that had lost its load-bearing walls. My sister, meanwhile, oscillated between charm and panic. She laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. She interrupted conversations she didn't belong in. She kept checking where I was, like she expected me to explode at any second, because that's what she would have done. But I didn't. That was the part they never understood about me. They assumed silence meant weakness because that's how they used it. Silence, for them, was something you imposed on others. For me, it was something I chose. Every step I took that night was intentional. Every word I didn't say was measured. I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to let the truth breathe. Someone eventually asked the question out loud. A family friend, emboldened by wine and curiosity, approached my mother and said, "I didn't realize you had another daughter. She seems accomplished." My mother's smile froze mid-curve. "She's complicated," she replied. The friend frowned. "She doesn't seem complicated," she said. "She seems composed." That single observation landed harder than any insult. Composed implied control. Composed implied capability. Composed implied that the story my parents had been telling about me for years was incomplete at best, dishonest at worst. I caught my sister watching that exchange, her jaw tight, her eyes calculating. Later, she cornered me near the service hallway, her voice low and sharp. "What are you doing?" she hissed. I met her gaze evenly. "What you asked me to," I said. "Helping." She scoffed. "You're enjoying this." I almost smiled. "No," I said quietly. "I'm surviving it." There's a difference, and she hated that she could hear it. The irony was thick enough to choke on. They had dressed me to disappear, and instead I had become the most discussed person in the room. Not because I demanded attention, but because I refused to collapse under it. People sense dignity the way they sense fear. Instinctively. Without needing proof. And once they do, they start asking questions that don't have flattering answers. As the night stretched on, invitations shifted. A professor asked me to email her. Someone from a nonprofit mentioned an opening. A former classmate recognized me and said, "I thought you moved away," and I answered, "I stayed," letting the weight of that choice linger. Each interaction rewrote the narrative my family thought they controlled. Each moment made it harder for them to pretend I was nothing more than a prop in their performance. By the time the cake was cut, my parents barely touched theirs. My sister posed for photos, but her smile was brittle now, stretched thin over something cracking underneath. And I stood at the edge of the room, still holding a tray, still dressed the way they chose for me, realizing something that settled deep in my chest with absolute clarity. They had mocked me publicly, expecting me to fold. Instead, they had invited witnesses. And witnesses change everything. The party didn't end with music fading or guests drifting out politely the way my parents had planned. It ended the way all carefully constructed illusions end, quietly, awkwardly, with people leaving earlier than expected and avoiding eye contact on their way out. Coats were retrieved too fast. Goodbyes sounded forced. The room that had been loud and self-congratulatory hours earlier now felt hollow, like a stage after the audience realizes the story isn't what they were promised. I watched it all from the periphery, still in the same uniform, still invisible in the way that suddenly made everyone uncomfortable. Because once people notice injustice, they don't want to be seen participating in it. My parents didn't say a word to me as guests filtered out. Not a thank you. Not an apology. Not even anger. Silence, this time, wasn't strategic, it was panic. My mother kept herself busy stacking napkins that didn't need stacking. My father paced between rooms, checking his phone like he was waiting for instructions that weren't coming. The kind of people who build their lives on control don't cope well when the narrative slips out of their hands. And that night, it had slipped completely. My sister finally confronted me when the last guest left. The smile was gone now. The confidence had evaporated. What stood in front of me wasn't a triumphant graduate, but a woman realizing her elevation depended entirely on someone she had just tried to crush. "You planned this," she said flatly. I shook my head. "You did," I replied. "I just didn't stop it." That distinction hit her harder than blame. Because it meant she couldn't accuse me of sabotage without admitting what she'd done first. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing she could say that didn't make her look worse. I changed out of the uniform in the same bathroom where my mother had handed it to me earlier that evening, folded it carefully, and placed it on the counter. Not out of respect. Out of closure. Then I walked out the front door without asking permission, without waiting to be dismissed, without looking back. The air outside felt different. Lighter. Colder. Honest. For the first time that night, I inhaled fully, like my lungs had been working on half capacity my entire life and had finally been allowed to expand. The messages started the next morning. At first, they were subtle. A former professor emailed to say they had heard I was back in town and would love to catch up. A classmate messaged me asking where I had been hiding. Someone tagged me in a photo from the party, not of me serving, but of me standing calmly in the background, composed, unbothered, unmistakably present. The comments underneath told the real story. "Wait, isn't she? Why was she dressed like that?" That didn't sit right with me. Public humiliation only works when the audience agrees with it. This time, they didn't. By Monday, the whispers reached my parents' world. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations slowed. People who had once praised their parenting now asked careful, pointed questions. My mother tried to control the damage the only way she knew how, by rewriting history. She told people I had insisted on helping. That I enjoyed playing the role. That it was our dynamic. But lies decay faster than truth when too many people see the cracks at once. Especially when the person you try to erase keeps standing calmly in the light. My sister stopped posting celebratory photos. The comments had turned unpredictable. Support was mixed with skepticism. Admiration with side-eye. She had graduated, yes, but something about that night had stuck to her achievement like a stain no caption could wash out. Success feels hollow when it's framed by cruelty. And everyone could sense it. What none of them realized yet was that the party wasn't the climax. It was the beginning. Because humiliation doesn't disappear when the lights turn off. It echoes. It travels. It reshapes relationships, reputations, and futures in ways no one can fully control once it's been witnessed. And my family had just handed me something far more powerful than an apology or acknowledgement. They had handed me clarity. Clarity about who they were. Clarity about who I was. And clarity about what I would never allow again. I didn't announce my departure from their lives. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final speech, no letter explaining my pain in tidy paragraphs they could dismiss as emotional. I simply became unavailable. I stopped answering calls. I let messages sit unread. I declined invitations with polite, non-committal replies until I stopped replying at all. Distance wasn't punishment. It was protection. And for the first time, I wasn't negotiating my peace with anyone. My parents noticed quickly. People like them always do. Control depends on access, and access had been revoked. My mother tried guilt first, leaving voicemails heavy with implication and selective memory. "We don't even know what we did wrong," she said, as if confusion erased accountability. My father tried authority, reminding me of everything they had done for me, as if support came with a lifetime ownership clause. My sister tried friendliness, then defensiveness, then silence of her own. None of it worked. Because none of it addressed the truth. Meanwhile, my life began to expand in ways that felt almost suspiciously calm. Opportunities that had once seemed distant arrived without drama. Conversations felt lighter. I slept better. I laughed more. It turned out that removing constant humiliation from your life creates space for growth. Who knew? I wasn't chasing success out of spite. I wasn't proving anything. I was simply living without being weighed down by people who needed me small to feel tall. Word traveled, as it always does. Not through gossip, but through pattern. I wasn't present at family events. I wasn't in photos. I wasn't available for explanations. People noticed. And when people asked, I didn't overshare. I didn't trash them. I simply said, "We're not close," and let the discomfort sit where it belonged. There is power in not rushing to defend yourself. Silence forces others to confront their own assumptions, and often, their own complicity. The realization hit my parents slowly, then all at once. They had lost their version of me forever. The compliant one. The one who smoothed things over. The one who absorbed humiliation quietly so the family could maintain its image. That version was gone. And the woman who replaced her didn't need their approval, forgiveness, or permission to exist. My sister tried one last time. She sent a message late one night, stripped of arrogance, heavy with something that might have been regret. "I never meant for it to go that far," she wrote. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I put my phone down. Intent doesn't undo impact. And closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from walking forward without dragging the past behind you. Time has a way of clarifying everything. Months later, when I looked back at that night, the uniform, the laughter, the calculated humiliation, it no longer burned. It sat in my memory like a scar you touch occasionally, not because it hurts, but because it reminds you of what you survived. That party had been designed to shrink me, but it ended up revealing everyone else. Their cruelty. Their insecurity. Their need to elevate one child by dismantling another. The truth is, they didn't lose me because I was weak. They lost me because I finally saw my worth clearly enough to stop negotiating it. I didn't rise by destroying them. I rose by removing myself from a system that thrived on my silence. And that, in the end, was the most devastating consequence of all. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's this: humiliation only works when you accept the role you're given. The moment you stop performing, the entire script collapses. You don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You don't need to be louder than the people who hurt you. You just need to walk away with your dignity intact, and let the witnesses remember what they saw. Because they will. And that memory will follow your abusers far longer than it ever follows you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been minimized, mocked, or forced into a role you didn't choose, know this: distance is not cruelty. Silence is not weakness. And choosing yourself is not selfish. It's survival. And sometimes, it's justice. If you want more stories about quiet revenge, personal justice, and reclaiming power without losing your humanity, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.